everyone, welcome back to my art channel, and I hope you have your own sketchbooks ready to draw with me. I really want to dive back into practicing art. I've been sketching a lot of portraits in the past. I even filled an entire tiny sketchbook with over 80 portraits, and also drew a bunch of larger, more detailed ones, but as you can see, they are all in monochrome, so value or lighting studies. And at this point, color is actually the thing I struggle with more. So for future sketchbook sessions, I want to focus on color studies instead. Today, I am using just a few colored pencils by Prismacolor that I've been wanting to try out for the longest time and just never got around to. I looked at my own pencil collection a while ago and realized that one of my favorite colored pencils that I'd used for a lot of my portrait sketches is actually by Prismacolor. It's this beautiful indigo blue shade here, and I've been using it so much that the label is barely legible anymore. So I kind of forgot that this was a random Prismacolor I'd bought years ago. Once I realized, I immediately wanted to give some more portrait-appropriate colors a try too. I bought these as single pencils at the art store, so I just picked colors that might be a good fit for a portrait. Let's see how this works out. To start with, I deliberately picked a reference with intense colors, so that I wouldn't just default to gray tones again. Mad Max Fury Road, which is one of my favorite movies, has an incredibly saturated color palette. So it jumped out at me when I scrolled through my future drawing practice collection of screenshots and other reference images. The 5 shades I went with are Burnt Ochre, Henna, Terracotta, Espresso, and the 90% Cool Grey. While drawing, I realized quickly that I had a big jump into colors, going from medium reds immediately to the dark grays. That jump in value looked more obvious on paper than when I'd just picked the colors, and while I tried to keep a very soft touch when using the darker shades, I still think that some areas of this portrait turned out too intense. I first used the lightest shade I have, a burnt ochre, to sketch in the overall shapes. For this stage I try to ignore that I'm drawing a face and instead look at the lines and angles I can find. It helps to look at the shadow shapes and think of them as isolated random geometric shapes instead of as a person's shadow, so that I draw what I actually see instead of what I think should be there. By the way, if you've seen some of my previous sketching videos, you might ask, why colored pencils? Wasn't I so excited about oil pastel color studies? Why not just use oil pastels for this? The answer might be interesting to keep in mind if you live in a similar climate as I do. Oil pastels are more difficult to use in cold temperatures. My desk isn't in a well-heated area of our home, and it gets quite cold, especially overnight. And I noticed when painting calendars as Christmas gifts that my oil pastels are more waxy and create flakes instead of the smooth, buttery texture I was used to. South Korea has very warm and humid summers, but winters can get very chilly and dry, and we had several snowstorms, so I have to warm up my oil pastels near the space heater before using them, and it can be a bit of a hassle. So at least in winter, I think using colored pencils is more practical. And I have to keep in mind how oil pastels react to the weather when using them, especially if I plan to go sketch outdoors again. This sketch didn't turn out very accurate when you look at the actual proportions. I wasn't too focused on those and instead concentrated on blending and getting a feel for how these colored pencils mix and layer. I wish I'd taken a bit more time during those first few minutes though to get her facial proportions right anyway, as the face turned out too long and I also completely changed the expression overall, I feel. Faces and figures being too long vertically is actually a common issue for me whenever I draw on paper or a sketchbook that's lying flat on my desk instead of angled on a table easel or drawing board, as my eyes get deceived by the perspective. The Prismacolor pencils create a very smooth surface, and since I've used polychromos in the past, which are much more precise but a bit harder to blend, I found it a very pleasing feeling and very intuitive to work in layers. I should have resisted using so much of the darker grey tones though, as they destroyed the impression of sunlight. Warmer shadows and midtones. Maybe just using multiple layers of the henna and terracotta colors would have made the portrait look more vibrant and alive, I think. Some of those last details I added in grey also made her expression a bit too harsh. But overall, I really like the feel of these Prismacolor pencils and will definitely get some more shades to draw a variety of portraits and figures for practice. I think even just using 2 or 3 of these per portrait would teach me a lot about color mixing and how light interacts with skin tones. I also want to experiment with layering Prismacolor pencils on top of acrylic paint or watercolors, so if you have any tips, let me know. How are your sketchbooks looking in the new year? I'm very motivated to practice a lot, so if you're interested in seeing someone make mistakes but also learn new things along the way, I hope you follow along with my sketchbook series and maybe join me in my no pressure plan of drawing more realistic and studying art fundamentals over the coming year. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.